Live from Washington, I'm Aisha Tanseem and you're watching Access Point. Balochistan, Pakistan's largest province by size but smallest by population, is facing its fifth insurgency since 1947. It started in early 2005 with the rape of an employee of Pakistan Petroleum Limited, Dr. Shazia Khalid. The rape occurred at the heavily guarded and government-owned Sui natural gas plant, and the perpetrator was allegedly an army officer. The insurgency intensified with the killing of Baloch leader Nawab Akbar Bugti. Pakistan's former military dictator General Pervez Musharraf is facing charges of conspiracy to commit murder in that case. The problems of the province are chronic, they're numerous, and our time is limited, so we'll try to focus on the big ones. Let's meet our guests. Dr. Frederick Greer is the director of the South Asia program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He has recently written a detailed report on Balochistan. It came out earlier this year in April. Sanaullah Baloch is a Baloch leader, a former senator, and was the youngest member ever to be elected to the National Assembly of Pakistan. He joins us via Skype from Africa, where he's working with a United Nations program. And we are trying to reach out to the Baloch government. We talked to Dr. Abdul Malik Baloch yesterday. As soon as he picks up his phone, he'll join us in the program. In the meantime, gentlemen, welcome to Access Point.
Thank you.
I will ask you the big question first, Dr. Greer. Pakistan keeps claiming that India is involved in Balochistan and is supporting the separatist movements. Have you ever looked at or found any evidence of that?
Well, not only have I not found evidence of that, but I don't think anybody has found any evidence of that. And so far, the Pakistani keep claiming that India is behind everything, except that we don't see it anywhere. And I remember the very beginning of the conflict. You mentioned the January 2005 and the rape of the female doctor in Sui. I mean, long before that, report had appeared in the Pakistani press. I'm not talking of the West. There's the Pakistani press saying that India was behind the construction of a number of training camps, were actually funding the militancy, and always announced that the evidence would be shown, you know, in the following days
and we have also, as journalists, tried to find that evidence. It hasn't been shared with us, and I've reached out to different sources, asked us, tell us on background if there's evidence. Apparently, none of that evidence has been shared with the U.S. government either. Let me reach out to you, Mr. Sanaullah Baloch. Do you think India is involved in Balochistan?
Not at all. You know, Balochistan conflict, the Balochistan issue dates back to 1839. It's much older in terms of its political conflict with the British. Even some of the Indian conflicts started much later. The Pakistan movement and the Muslim League movement started much later. Balochistan has been politically marginalized both by the British colonists. Later on, when the Pakistan forcefully annexed in 1948, so the Pakistan exactly pursued the same colonial policy, and Pakistan is still trying to colonize Balochistan through different ways. Pakistan aggressively expanded its cantonment. Pakistan aggressively continued with the colonial policy. Now, currently, Balochistan has more than 200,000 soldiers, and most of these soldiers, paramilitary forces, security operators, intelligence agencies, they are recruited, they are deputed, or they are employed mostly from outside Balochistan. So Balochistan conflict has nothing to do with India, has nothing to do with Pakistan. Even Pakistan definitely inherited Balochistan conflict. But Pakistan has further marginalized Baloch people rather than addressing political issues, social issues, economical issues, cultural issues. Balochistan is a very sensitive region. It's geostrategically very important. It's exactly located in junction of South Asia, Southwest Asia, Central Asia, Middle East, or you can say it's West Asia.
Mr. Baloch, since you've gone back kind of further in the history and talked about the forced annexation of Balochistan to Pakistan, I need to point out at this point that in the recent elections in May 11, the Baloch public did participate in the elections, and there seems to be, according to Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, goodwill towards this government. You yourself have been a member of parliament and a senator of the Pakistan government. So wouldn't you say that if the conditions were right and if political rights were given, Baloch in general would like to stay with Pakistan, even though the initial annexation was forced?
Well, the people of Balochistan, the political leadership, the political strata of Baloch people, they tried their best since 1948. They have accepted the geopolitical divide in the subcontinent. They tried to remain within the framework of Pakistan. They demanded provincial autonomy. They divided some kind of a self-rule. They divided to control on their natural resources. They demanded some kind of a cultural autonomy, political autonomy, and a very comfortable federal structure. But unfortunately, Pakistan is not willing, Islamabad is not willing to give that kind of political rights to the people of Balochistan. They want to maintain colonial rule. They want to deal with Balochistan. They deal with Balochistan like it's a mega garrison. It's a mega cantonment. Now it's been almost converted into a mega jail, mega prison for the Baloch people. Pakistan is not willing. The Baloch people have shown their willingness. We took part in parliamentary process. We have been part and parcel of political process. But unfortunately, the Pakistani side seems more reluctant to the political process.
Okay, let me come back to you on that, and we are still waiting to connect to the Balochistan's current government and their spokesman. As soon as we do that, we'll get their point of view. Dr. Greer, Mr. Sanallah Baloch is considered a mainstream politician in Pakistan. He's been a member of parliament. Do you think his expression of anger and frustration shows how the Baloch are feeling, or do you think that with the new government in place, there seems to be an opportunity that has opened up?
Well, I think there is no contradiction between the two positions. The first thing is I think that it does reflect a good deal of the anger which exists in Balochistan today. But what he says is extremely interesting, because if you look at some of the polls, for whatever they're worth, before the election, you had about 30% people who favor independence and 63% who accepted the idea of staying within the Pakistani Federation. So that doesn't mean that everybody is happy to be within the Pakistani Federation, but everybody accepts the idea of staying there and believes that perhaps an independent Baloch state would not necessarily be viable. So I think that what he says about, the majority of the population accepting the idea of being there is very much there. Now that there is new hope from the population on the new government, well, there's probably everything which is left to the population hope. And yes, we are in a new configuration. People will expect some result. Let's see whether those results materialize or not.
Mr. Baloch, in the recent APC that was held, the federal government, including the Prime Minister of Pakistan and the head of the armed forces, General Ishfaq Parvez Kiani, who was present there, they gave the mandate to the Balochistan's current chief minister, Dr. Abdul Malik Baloch, to talk to the separatist and the exiled leaders of Balochistan. Do you think at this point, if the army is backing it, there's more chance of coming to some kind of reconciliation?
No, exactly. If you look at the final resolution of the APC, what they tried, Islamabad tried to localize the conflict itself. Islamabad is not willing to accept Balochistan conflict as a national conflict, as a political conflict, as an economic conflict. Balochistan conflict is directed to Islamabad. It is a conflict between Baloch people and Islamabad. We don't have any conflict with Dr. Malik. Dr. Malik has 6th and 7th provincial assembly seats in Balochistan. If chief minister is going to talk, what chief minister is going to deliver? Chief minister, this is after 24th September earthquake in Havaran, Dr. Malik has repeatedly asked for international community to come and assist. But a major general from NDMA said, no, we don't allow any foreign to come and assist the people of Balochistan. You can see what the chief minister exactly, what kind of right it has. The Balochistan conflict is directly related with Islamabad. Islamabad has to negotiate whether with the political forces.
Basically what you're saying, that even though Islamabad has given its mandate to Dr. Abdul Malik Baloch, that he will still not be successful? And I'll come to you after this. Go ahead.
No, I think there is no need to endeavor to pass on this mandate to Dr. Malik. The conflict itself is related to the central government. What the people of Balochistan are demanding, self-rule. It's a kind of a greater autonomy, right of self-determination.
But the 18th Amendment... The 18th Amendment gives a lot of provincial autonomy, though. Yes, I understand there are a lot of problems and the security forces are still active, etc. But it's a process, wouldn't you agree?
No, 1973 Constitution gives enough mandates, enough guarantees, enough constitutional guarantees with regard to human rights, political rights, right on resources. But if 1973 Constitution was not implemented in full spirit, then how the 18th Amendment is going to be implemented or accepted or respected by the central government. Oh. It's a gimmick. We have one of the best constitution, no doubt, because I'm a constitutionalist. I work on constitution. In terms of constitution, even the 1973 constitution was enough. But there is no will by the central government to devolve, to decentralize these powers to the provinces. Balochistan is controlled by a major general. Balochistan is controlled by a brigadier. Balochistan is controlled by some intelligence agencies. The other political facade you see, the political process, it's completely a gimmick. Even ourselves have been trying to be part of this process, try to
okay, so what you're saying is that you're saying that the recent elections has not changed that. Let me come back to you, Dr. Gray. You wanted to add something here.
No, I think this has to be placed in the continuity of what has been done before. What we have seen under the previous government is a civilian government in Quetta running the show, but at the same time you had the continuation of a kill and dump policy, the systematic elimination of a number of professionals, intellectuals, everybody who was not necessarily involved in the separatist movement, but had some sympathy for the nationalist movement. And all those people were systematically eliminated. We're talking of the young and brightest. Mm-hmm. We're talking of the people who could have actually at some point, how could I say, incarnate the Baloch aspiration and perhaps bring some possibility for the
let me quickly ask you here. I was talking to John Bulade, who's the spokesman of the Balochistan's government right now, and he said for the last 1 month they haven't found any tortured dead bodies, and that the security services are now, well, so basically a huge reduction from before when you used to find very frequently, and he's saying that that's because the security forces are on board this time.
Well, if this is the case, this is definitely good news, and this is a move which is not only to be welcomed, but to be encouraged and controlled. Let me just remind you that when under the previous government there was an attempt by the UN to inquire about that, nobody in the security forces was willing to be on board. So let's see what it means, and it will take a little longer than 1 month to really verify whether this is a trend or this is just a temporary movement.
Mr. Baloch, you don't think the security forces could be on board, even though, as I said, the Balochistan government is claiming there's no more kill and dump anymore?
Bibi, if you go through the recent details, recent statistics and recent figures, 72 kill and dump bodies have been found in last 3 months, one of the highest rate of appearing of mutilated, tortured bodies of Baloch activists, Baloch youth. So in this last 3 months, definitely, if you talk about the statistics, figures, facts, John Bulade doesn't, the John Bulade's claims doesn't exactly reflect that statistics and that fact. Number two, Dr. Malik himself has exactly, as mentioned in his interviews, in his talks to the TV people, that I'm facing difficulties. I'm facing difficulties to convince the military and paramilitary, and particularly we have to understand military and paramilitary forces in Balochistan are non-Baloch. Ethnically non-Baloch military and paramilitary forces exactly kill and dump these Baloch activists with impunity. And there is this inbuilt culture. If you kill a Baloch, nobody is going to ask you. That inbuilt culture needs to be addressed at the central level. Nawaz Sharif,
I understand what you're saying. There has been a kill and dump policy. Human Rights Commission of Pakistan has pointed to it. Dr. Gray's report has pointed to it. A lot of international human rights groups have pointed to it. On the other side also has a torture and kill policy, though, at this point. They're even attacking those who are trying to help out with the earthquake relief. So the separatist movement is not exactly angelic here.
I totally denounce violence. Even I have been requesting that Baloch armed groups after this earthquake on 25th, 26th September, that was my appeal to the Baloch armed groups, that there should be a kind of a humanitarian truce. There should be a kind of a humanitarian ceasefire, a kind of an environment to develop to establish a humanitarian corridor, allow the international community, aid agencies, transparent aid agencies, experienced aid agencies, UN agencies to come and assist the people of Balochistan, and particularly earthquake victims. Definitely nobody, even we as a political party, we don't believe on violence.
So let's go on talking about that a little more. Dr. Gray, you want to add something?
Yes, I want to add one thing, which is that has been one of the pervert character of this conflict, which is the more moderate element has been systematically targeted. And what has been highlighted in the process is precisely the most radical element, the violent ones, which was a very effective way to discredit the entire movement. As I said, the vast majority of the population does reflect on what Senator Sanaullah Baloch said and does not necessarily wish the violence to be pursued. But I think there was a deliberate policy to highlight this. And this violence by the separatists is a reality, is probably condemnable, is certainly condemnable, and at the same time, this was a deliberate policy to discredit the entire movement.
So do you think at this point, after the earthquake, anything can be said to the separatists to say, stop at least for a time being, at least while the earthquake
I think that everything can and should be said to the separatists, not just for the time being, but for longer. There is absolutely no reason to continue in that direction, especially when the violence that they are perpetrating end up discrediting the very movement that they are trying to promote. This is totally counterproductive.
Oh. Mr. Baloch, what would you say about that? As Dr. Greer said, this violence is actually hurting the Baloch movement rather than helping it, particularly at a time when the earthquake has hit some of the very remote areas of Balochistan. Why do the separatist leaders think this will not harm their movement and are continuing with it?
You know, it's a very complex and a very difficult situation over there in Avaran. What we have exactly requested, what we have trying to advocate as a human rights activist, as a political activist, that both Pakistan military, Pakistan paramilitary security forces, they don't have any humanitarian experience. Neither the Baloch armed groups have experience in humanitarian issues. That's why the area needs to be completely cleared by both, by Pakistan paramilitary forces, military forces, and by the Baloch armed groups. And the international community, particularly aid agencies, should be allowed to operate in that area too. Now what is happening? Exactly both. The government of Pakistan is trying to take advantage of this crisis. Some of the religious outfits like Jamaatul Dawa, Al Khair Trust, and some of these outfits have been facilitated by the security forces to come and assist the people of Balochistan, establish madrasas, try to religize the overall crisis, the overall this disaster. Other side, definitely the Baloch armed group see this as a kind of a challenge for their movement, because they consider Balochistan as a moderate, secular and liberal territory.
Let me understand something. Mr. Baloch, let me understand something. You want the paramilitary forces, the FC, etc., to completely leave Balochistan, but Balochistan is not just facing an insurgency, it's facing other kinds of violence as well, including terrorist bombings, sectarian violence, and the police is just not up to the standard to deal with that.
No, I'm particularly talking to with regard to Avaran crisis, with regard to earthquake in Avaran, or a disaster in Avaran. I say that the Avaran district, we have to start from somewhere. The Avaran district, some of these tehsils, the most affected tehsils of Avaran, that area need to be completely neutralized. Both military and paramilitary should leave that area. I'm not talking about Balochistan. Definitely, we want that Balochistan should be demilitarized, but it needs a conflict resolution process. Pakistan is not willing to accept is not willing to have any conflict resolution process. It's dealing with Balochistan with bits and pieces. They think we give 18th Amendment, later some other rights, but we are demanding that Balochistan is a serious conflict, historical conflict. Balochistan
so not a piecemeal approach, a whole approach. Let me come to this issue of the FC and the paramilitary leaving the area. After the earthquake that hit Kashmir in 2005, military was credited for really helping out in the earthquake areas. Do you think the military is helping out as they claim that they are, or should they leave?
But frankly, this is the question to ask to the people on the ground and not to me. But there is a larger issue there, which is a question of trust with the military. Because this is fine to say, well, the police is not up to the task of fighting, whatever violence emerges, sectarian and otherwise, but this is also a fact. And it has been proving over the past few years that they have been actually initiating part of this violence. And there is part of this violence, like in other parts of the country, not just in Balochistan, that they do instrumentalize for purpose of their own, like eliminating some of the separatists and so on. And there is part that they don't control, which they actually fight. So this is, yes, indeed, a very complicated situation. When it comes to the trust of the population, that's a different matter. And the way they will interact with them is largely determined by this level of trust.
Let me ask you something. You deal with the whole of South Asia. Can you think of other examples like this? Afghanistan, for example, is maybe a good example. The police right now all across Pakistan, but particularly in areas like KPKN and Balochistan, are just not trained to deal with terrorist activities. They're just not trained to deal with managing a population of, well, how do you, and if the military is not trusted, what should be done in the interim period while you train the police and...
No, I mean, well, the interim period is always the old thing. First of all, there is training of police, which is possible. No one will expect capacity building overnight. No one will expect things to take place like that. Now, you know, over the past 10 years, because then we're talking of the larger South Asia, not just the Baloch conflict. Over the past 10 years, there have been many proposals to the Pakistani government to help build up a police in many different places, to help build up a counterinsurgency things, which never happened because they still saw their army as a tool which was directed against the larger objective in their mind, which was India and so on. So, you know, there is a very local dimensions to this local problem, which is not, which is the result of a very technical, very political decision. And therefore, yes, the capacity is a problem. There have been answers proposed to it, and no one expected to be built, but there is also a direct political responsibility behind this. And this direct responsibility was not one of the Baloch or anything.
Okay, now I need to repeat that we are still trying to reach out to Dr. Abdul Malik Baloch or one of his advisors. We did talk to him earlier and he was going to be here. All of their phones are off, so I wouldn't be surprised if they're in some kind of a meeting or something. But as soon as we get them, we'll get them online. Mr. Baloch, let me come back to you. Human Rights Commission of Pakistan has recently released a report and a lot of recommendations that they've said. But one thing that they said is that after the recent May 11 elections, there seems to be hope in Balochistan. People seem to kind of be willing to give this government a bit of time to sort out the situation. From talking to you, it seems like some of them are really not.
Well, first of all, definitely the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan has done a great job previously as well. They came up with different reports, including some recommendations as well. And like my colleague Greer has mentioned, that international community has recommended very, very kind of reasonable recommendations to the government of Pakistan with regard to Balochistan. I'm not pessimistic about the Balochistan situation. But the way election was conducted this time, it was horrible. It was really a kind of a free, fair, and transparent selection. I was part and parcel of the election process as well. Exactly late night, they replaced our presiding officers, and most of the presiding officers came from the security forces. Unfortunately, I lost with 200 votes. So you can imagine there was a policy that to come up with a manageable political assembly, a kind of assembly where some groups, those are more manageable for the establishment, need to be brought in the process. So this kinds of a manageable political you can say strategy is not going to help, is not going to work for Balochistan. We have to take on board the armed groups, we have to take on board the other political groups as well, and we have to go through some of the tested conflict resolution process, like it has been in Aceh. The process has been in the KRG, the Kurdistan Regional Government, with the Iraqi government. Balochistan has a very complex and sensitive conflict issue. The violence itself is not terrorism. You cannot deal with it. Balochistan as one of the highest professional, you can say, security paramilitary forces. They are truly expert in kill and dump, suppression, political assassination, target killing.
So basically what you're saying is that all of this has to be tackled simultaneously, which I think anyone would agree. Dr. Greer, you have mentioned something when your report came out in April. You said that there needs to be some kind of UN mandated commission in Balochistan to monitor the situation?
Well, I think that could be a proposal, a UN mission, observation mission. I mean, this would not necessarily solve the problem. That would definitely provide the mechanism that would help, first of all, help denounce the atrocity if there still are atrocities being committed, and B, if there is a true willingness on the part of the authorities to actually start building peace and sort of political
but that
process,
may not be
that would be
acceptable
the best tool to have confidence-building measures, because there was a mentoring body.
Yeah, but do you think there can be, just like the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan said, a political, a provincial human rights commissioner, somebody respected in the area? Because having a UN there'll be a sovereignty issue, and the government may not want to do that. That'd be more difficult.
There is a sovereignty issue. There are also responsibility by any sovereign state, and we tend to divide it a little too often. In fact, we're not asking the UN, or I'm not asking the UN to actively do anything practical in this, simply monitoring the situation. And if this monitoring is done properly, that can also be an instrument of confidence building measures. So that's a possibility. There can be other possibilities. I mean, the one you just mentioned, the proposal from the Pakistan Human Rights Commission, why not? But I mean, there has to be a monitoring mechanism which will be able to tell the Pakistani, the Baloch, the rest of the world, this is what's actually going on. There has been progress, there has been regression, and there we go, and this is the direction in which we can go. But we need a mechanism of some sort, because otherwise this is the Baloch word against the Pakistani establishment word. And it comes in conflict with other general interests, such as, for example, whatever comes out of the constraint of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and so on.
Mr. Baloch, I didn't get time to talk a lot about the earthquake and the relief efforts. What are some of the biggest problems being faced in those areas right now?
Number one, definitely, it's difficult for NGOs, for international aid agencies, to get into that area because they are not being allowed. Even the MSF and some other credible organizations have been in negotiation with the government of Pakistan, but unfortunately the government of Pakistan has neglected, denied, or access to most of these experienced international organizations. That's the number one issue. Number two, definitely Avaran is one of the poorest region in terms of Balochistan even. There is still, the military is taking that in their own strategic point of view. They are trying to take advantage of this disaster, and definitely armed groups, Baloch armed groups, they don't want to vacate, or they don't want to surrender this area because of the disasters. So what is the major issue? That the tension is still there between the between the armed forces and between the armed groups. Number one, the international community has the responsibility to encourage government of Pakistan to create some kind of a humanitarian corridor, a kind of a to come up with a humanitarian truce, a kind of a humanitarian ceasefire, to allow international organizations to operate rather than religious fundamentalists like Jamaatul Dawa, Al Khair Trust are very fairly and you can say very easily working over there as compared to the other
but the government of
Pakistan,
but the government of Pakistan says the violence, especially after the earthquake, and the violence hindering the relief efforts is coming from the militants and not them.
Definitely, it's a conflict zone. In a conflict zone, everybody wants to have its own strategy. Nobody is willing to relinquish their power. Nobody is willing to leave that area. So that's our proposal, that small area, one tehsil where people are affected, that area need to be declared as a humanitarian zone. Both armed forces and armed groups should definitely leave international organizations to work there. Once we have that humanitarian zone, I think both Pakistan paramilitary forces and the Baloch armed groups are going to definitely
respect that. Okay, so we got your opinion. We're coming towards the end of the show. We have about 20 seconds. Dr. Greer, his idea of creating a humanitarian corridor, if the government announces today that it's doing that, do you think the armed groups will come aboard with that? This
is to be seen, but this is a proposal which definitely needs to be explored, because the current situation is definitely not acceptable on either side. So, you know,
so the government
if that can bring something positive, then let's take it.
Well, thank you so much. The issue, as I said, the province's problems are chronic and they're numerous, and our time was limited. But we did what we could. We'll come back to this topic again. Our guest in the Washington studio was Dr. Frederick Greer, the director of the South Asia program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, And via Skype from Africa, we were joined by Sanaullah Baloch, a Baloch leader, a former senator, a former member of National Assembly. And thank you all for watching. Thank you for questions and comments and suggestions. We look forward to having you again next time. Goodbye.